все возможно в современном мире, но я уже говорил, и это понятно для всех, что это будет в одном шаге от полномасштабной Третьей мировой войны. Думаю, что в этом вряд ли кто-нибудь заинтересован. Служащая страна-то там присутствует, мы же знаем. Мы слышим и французскую речь, там, и английскую речь. Ничего хорошего в этом нет, прежде всего для них, потому что они погибают. И в большом количестве. Вот. Но в конечном итоге это же не наш выбор. Если кто-то хочет немножко прикрыть внутриполитические проблемы своей агрессивной внешней риторикой, ну что это известный во всем мире и часто применяемый прием.
This is Kushal Kamar. He is an Indian astrologer whose name and statements have risen to light recently over the past few weeks. His latest statement in a post on a media platform called The Medium was the latest addition to the myriad of World War III predictions since the likes of Nostradamus and Baba Vanga. However, unlike his famous predecessors, Mr. Kumar says that World War III is just a few weeks away. According to NDTV, Mr. Kumar, a Vedic astrologer, uses charts to show planetary alignment to make forecasts about future events. And this is what he concluded after his recent reading of the tea leaves, so to speak. And I quote, "Now Tuesday, the 18th of June, has the strongest planetary stimulus to trigger World War III, although the 10th and 29th of June may have a say as well. You see, this danger of a world war is coming to the forefront because of recent escalatory statements made particularly in the Ukraine-Russo war." Express UK, a newspaper from the United Kingdom, commented on the 24th of May that a NATO ally is considering taking direct action in the Russia-Ukraine war by shooting down Russian missiles over Ukraine. And that ally is Poland, who is reportedly weighing up the possibility of intervening in the ongoing conflict, according to Foreign Ministry spokesperson Paweł Wronski, who claims that Ukraine approached Poland with the idea. Poland's deputy foreign minister has also said that the country considered shooting down Russian missiles close to its border. But shooting down Russian missiles pales in comparison to what NATO allies have been deliberating on for the past 2 weeks. First, it was the prospect of putting NATO boots in Ukraine, either as trainers for Ukrainian troops, possibly near the front line in East Ukraine, or to free up Ukrainian troops guarding its borders on other fronts far away from the action, so that they can then join their brothers in arms on the front line in the east. Then it escalated further to talks of allowing Ukraine to use Western-supplied weapons to strike targets deep in Russia, which until now has been prohibited. As you will see, President Putin has made it clear that these actions will not be tolerated, and then went on to issue what I and others consider to be his most severe warning to Western NATO countries, particularly those European countries bordering Russia. So given the Indian astrologer's prediction, coupled with the comments of the Serbian president and a British MP, there is a serious question to be answered right now, which is, how close are we to World War III? The Serbian president seems to think that we are well on our way.
Da je još malo vremena ostalo da se rat u Ukrajini zaustavi i nadam se da je to moguće, a plašim se da nije i plašim se da je, kako to telo reče, voz iz stanice krenuo, kao što sam vam to nekada govorio, i da to niko neće zaustaviti. Moja procena da će stvari biti mnogo teže, mnogo gore i da može da se dogodi da imamo veću tragediju nego što smo imali u Drugom svetskom ratu.
So let's get into it. The New York Times published an article on the 16th of May authored by 4 very senior journalists stationed in the United States and Europe. And the opening paragraph was this: NATO allies are inching closer to sending troops to Ukraine, but on the purpose of allegedly training Ukrainian forces, a move, the article says, that would be another blurring of a previous red line and could draw the United States and Europe more directly into the Russo-Ukrainian war. You see, the problem for the West is that Ukraine is now in an extremely precarious position. As the New York Times described it, their manpower shortage has reached a critical point.
Процентов 20 остальные 200. Даже забрать их не разрешили.
А це чому? Щоб гроші не давати за них. Так людей хапають на вулиці, вони воювати не вміють, фермерів беруть.
And its position on the battlefield in recent weeks has seriously worsened as Russia has accelerated its advances. This manpower shortage was exposed to be quite acute in the recent Kharkiv offensive, which saw a mere 10,000 force of Russian infantry freely cross the border into the Kharkiv region of Ukraine, capturing several border villages before Ukraine was able to send its last reserves to stem the hemorrhaging. Ukrainian officials have reportedly asked American and NATO counterparts to help train some 150,000 new recruits, but get this, to do so closer to the front line in the east of Ukraine for faster deployment. The initial response from the US has been in the negative. The new chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, General Charles Brown Jr., said that such an effort would put NATO trainers at risk and would most likely mean deciding whether to use precious air defenses to protect the trainers instead of critical Ukrainian infrastructure near the battlefield. Of course, the other obvious risk is that should any of these NATO trainers be attacked by Russia, NATO and America would be in a direct hot war. Despite America's initial reluctance, however, the other NATO countries have not been so reserved. We all know of President Macron's statements that nothing should be ruled out when it comes to sending Western troops to Ukraine. But the government of Estonia also has not ruled out the possibility of sending troops to Western Ukraine to take over rare positions that could free Ukrainian troops to go to the front, as stated by Estonia's National Security Minister. Lithuania's foreign minister has also backed Macron's stance in an interview with The Guardian and stated, in quotations, "Our troops have been training Ukrainians in Ukraine before the war, so returning to this tradition might be quite doable." In this video clip here, it was put this way.
You mentioned training mission, and I can tell you that Lithuania is ready to consider being part of a coalition of the countries that could be led, for example, by France or any other country that could perform the training in territory of Ukraine.
The manpower shortage in Ukraine, therefore, seems to be not so much that the male population is all but dead, but more that the availability of trained and battle-ready Ukrainian troops is badly depleted. Pulling troops out of Ukraine to be trained by American trainers is not only time-consuming, but usually the training is simply not sufficient. And further, faster and better training is direly needed to push back the expected Russian offensive this summer. And what makes matters worse is that the United States has already tried to help in the past by assisting the running of a NATO training program in western Ukraine. Just last month, the US Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, General Christopher Cavoli, suggested that the West can help Ukraine by training Ukrainian troops in Lvov, near the western border with Poland. The problem is that Russia has already bombed Lvov, including recently, just a few weeks ago, with cruise missiles that attacked critical infrastructure. But training Ukrainian troops or sending NATO troops to free up Ukrainian troops so that they can join their comrades on the front line is only one of the likely escalations, and the lesser one of that. Since the Kharkiv breakthrough by the Russians in the north, Ukraine has been urging its allies to allow Kiev to use Western-supplied arms to conduct strikes inside Russia. The current US stance on this issue was illustrated by the then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff about a year ago, where he said as follows, in quotations, "I can say that we have asked Ukrainians not to use our US supplied equipment for direct attacks into Russia. But recently, the US Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, has stated the current stance quite vaguely as being this: we will adapt and adjust. I think you have seen over the 2+ years as the nature of the battlefield has changed, the means that Russia is employing has changed. We have adapted and adjusted to meet. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg urged members of the alliance to lift restrictions on the use of their weapons to allow Ukraine to strike legitimate targets inside Russia.
I think the time has come for allies to consider whether they should lift some of the restrictions they have put on the use of weapons they have donated to Ukraine, because especially now when a lot of the fighting is going on in Kharkiv, close to the border, to deny Ukraine the possibility of using these weapons against legitimate military targets on Russian territory makes it very hard for them to defend themselves.
Then, during a visit to Kiev on the 3rd of May, British Foreign Secretary David Cameron told Reuters that Ukraine could use weapons provided by London to strike targets inside Russia, and that it was up to the Kiev regime whether or not to do so.
In our view, it is their decision about how to use these weapons. They're defending their country. They were illegally invaded by Putin, and they must take those steps. We don't discuss any caveats that we put on those things, but let's be absolutely clear. Russia has launched an attack into Ukraine, and Ukraine absolutely has the right to strike back at Russia.
This was then echoed by French President Emmanuel Macron, who said on Tuesday that Ukraine should be allowed to hit military sites inside Russia that Moscow was using to attack Ukraine.
Ukrainien, oui, est attaqué, de fait, depuis des bases, et qui sont en Russie. Alors comment on explique aux Ukrainiens qu'il va falloir protéger ces villes, et au fond tout ce qu'on voit en ce moment autour de Kharkiv, si on leur dit vous n'avez pas le droit d'atteindre le point d'où sont tirés les missiles? En fait, on leur dit on vous livre des armes, mais vous ne pouvez pas vous défendre. Donc nous, on reste exactement dans le même cadre. On pense qu'on doit leur permettre de neutraliser les sites militaires d'où sont tirés les missiles, et au fond les sites militaires depuis lesquels l'Ukraine est agressée.
Followed by German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who stated, and I quote, "We think we should allow them to neutralize military sites from which missiles are fired, but cautioned that we should not allow them to hit other targets and civilian or other military sites." Long story short, the list of countries, as reported by Reuters, who has agreed with this policy are as follows: Denmark, Netherlands, Czech Republic, and the Baltics. A more recent list has been circulating on social media as tweeted on X. This permission was immediately seized upon by the Kiev regime. On the 27th of May, Reuters reported that a Ukrainian drone targeted a long-range radar deep inside Russia on Sunday, which was the second Ukrainian strike in a week on infrastructure used by Russia to monitor Ukraine's military activities. The radar that was hit was near the city of Orsk in the Orenburg region, which was some 1,500 kilometers from the closest territory held by Kiev's forces. These radars were described as being part of Russia's ballistic early warning system, whose primary function was to detect and track intercontinental ballistic missiles and to determine if Russia was under nuclear attack. These strikes within Russian territory have prompted two responses, one from the United States of America and the other, as is expected, from Russia. Washington Post reported on the 29th of May that the United States is concerned about Ukrainian strikes in Russian nuclear radar stations. To be specific, the United States feared that recent Ukrainian drone strikes targeting Russian nuclear early warning systems could dangerously unsettle Moscow at a time when the Biden administration is weighing whether to lift restrictions on Ukraine using US-supplied weapons in cross-border attacks. Now it must be noted that according to an unnamed US official, said that these sites have not been involved in supporting Russia's war against Ukraine, but they are sensitive locations because Russia could perceive that its strategic deterrent capabilities are being targeted. which he said could undermine Russia's ability to maintain nuclear deterrence against the United States. The official went on to opine that Russia could think that it has a diminished ability to detect early nuclear activity against it, which then could become an issue. Security analysts said that this perception is likely fueled by an erroneous conviction that Ukraine's targeting is directed by Washington, D.C. and can trigger a perilous escalation with the West before finally warning that nuclear command and control and early warning sites should be off limits. But despite these concerns and restrictions on Ukraine's targeting, Russia's head of Federal Security Service thinks that NATO is indeed gearing up for potential nuclear strikes on Russian soil. An article in the Eurasia Times, published also on the 29th of May, Russian General Kuleshov, speaking to a state-run RIA Novosti, outlines NATO's purportedly aggressive maneuvers near Russia's borders. He spoke of a surge in reconnaissance activities and intensified combat training by NATO troops, including drills that simulate nuclear strikes against Russia. These accusations follow a recent directive by Russian President Vladimir Putin instructing the military to conduct exercises involving deployment of tactical nuclear weapons. Adding to the escalating situation, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev on May 26th issued a chilling warning to the US and Poland, asserting that if the United States destroyed any Russian positions in Ukraine, it would start the very topic of this video, World War III. And it does seem that the Russians are not just using this as propaganda for fear-mongering purposes. I mean, just listen to what this British MP, Andrew Bridgen, said in this interview right here.
Rishi wants out. We are actually at war with Russia now. We've got. They're not just haven't told you. Haven't told you. So say that again. We're actually at war with Russia now. I met with Andrei Kellen, the Russian ambassador in London, a couple of months ago, and he said that we know that your people are firing those Storm Shadow missiles at us out of Ukraine because you couldn't train the Ukrainians to do it. We know you're doing it, and I mean, I think everybody knows that there are lots of US. UK, French. The French are in there.
I thought it was the Brits were down on the ground and special advisors.
Yeah.
Training sessions and teaching them and showing them.
Isn't that how?
But they were apparently. That's how we started with the Vietnam War.
Vietnam War, yeah.
Dude, what the fuck are we doing poking the bear? That's really stupid.
They're determined to get us into a war with Russia, and thank God we've got someone in Putin who at least has got some brains.
Now you sound like a Putin lover.
Well, I'm not. I'm not convinced any of them are any good. But at the end of the day, if you look at the facts, since '91, we've moved NATO 1,000 miles nearer to Moscow. They haven't moved nearer to us.
And amidst all of these escalating tensions, Russian President Vladimir Putin issued a stark warning to the West that NATO members in Europe were playing with fire by proposing to let Ukraine use Western-supplied weapons to strike inside Russia, which, he said, could trigger a global conflict.
Представители стран НАТО, особенно в Европе, особенно в малых странах, они должны вообще давать себе отчет, с чем они играют. Они должны помнить о том, что это, как правило, государство с небольшой территорией и с очень плотным населением. И этот фактор, который они должны иметь в виду, прежде чем говорить о нанесении ударов вглубь российской территории.
Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, an independent political analyst based in Brussels, considered this a major statement from President Putin, who has generally practiced huge restraint in this Ukraine war despite Ukraine's and NATO's many escalations, and who he characterized as being a nice guy no more.
Paul Craig Roberts have come out and said repeatedly that he is leading us into World War III by being such a nice guy. Now, on Monday, he was not a nice guy. And I'd like to say exactly why he wasn't a nice guy. First of all, he called out the falseness of the statements that Macron, and Stoltenberg, and Cameron, and Blinken have made regarding freeing the Ukrainians to do what they need to defend themselves. He said this is ignoring the fact that they all know or should know that the targeting and even pressing of the button of these weapons is being done by NATO officers, not by Ukrainians. It's not even clear if the Ukrainians who are standing by know where they're sending the missiles that they're being blown. The point that Mr. Putin was making he stripped away the fig leaf. The Russians have known this. They've talked about this among themselves on television, but they never had the head of state say what he said on Monday, that this is really NATO that is using Ukraine for its purposes to wage its war on Russia. The only thing, he was a hairbreadth away from declaring war on NATO. And there was more that he said, which we haven't heard from Mr. Putin or from any leader of the Soviet Union since Mr. Khrushchev. And that is, he addressed himself to the three Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. And he said, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, because they're actually ladies prime ministers there, you take a step back for a moment and consider who you are and who we are. And you are small countries that are densely populated. Do reconsider your words that you will bring Russia to its knees. And those were the words a week ago of the Prime Minister of Estonia. This is as close as the head of state could come to say that he will obliterate, wipe off the map, these three states.
I turn it over to you, my friends. How close are we to World War III?